Are you ready for the weather wars? Let's enter the buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as
Sharon Daphna is joining me today. She's an Oregon worker, a researcher, and writer who runs the Chembo.com, focusing on chemtrails. So we'll be discussing what the chemtrails are, perhaps why they're being spread, and how to combat them. Sharon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to talk about this subject, obviously, because there's so much interest. I mean, recently Prince passing away, and people, there was actually a huge resurgence of conversation around chemtrails because he had mentioned this in one of his interviews with Tavis Smiley about the chemtrails and,
That's right.
and the impact it's having on our health, and also just questioning, well, who's spreading it and why? So let's start with the basic. What are chemtrails? What distinguishes a chemical trail from a traditional idea of a contrail, from the jet-fueled waste from a plane, for example?
Well, traditionally, a contrail would occur at high altitudes above 30,000 feet. It's just a vapor trail, sort of like car exhaust on a cold day or your breath on a cold day. It's short, and it travels behind the plane, and it dissipates. So you'll see a short little trail behind the plane. That's just jet exhaust. When it sticks and spreads from horizon to horizon, spreads out and covers the sky, that is not normal condensation. That is matter being placed in the atmosphere. Those are metal nanoparticulates, and they're used in weather modification. There are other purposes for them, which we'll find, but primarily we see that they're being used to change the weather, and they're being used with energies from HARP and cell tower arrays that bombard those particulates.
So the idea is that the government tries to say or explain that they're doing some kind of weather modification. You mentioned sort of cloud seeding, for example.
Yeah.
But we're talking about some very heavy metals that are being sprayed, right? And as well as other things, I believe, that have been found as particulates go from the trails, including bacteria and other things, blood samples. I mean, very strange ingredients.
Yeah, stuff that doesn't make sense. Yeah, like desiccated red blood cells and stuff like that. Primarily, it's aluminum, barium, and strontium nanoparticulates, and they're terribly harmful for our health, and they're terrible for the environment. And that's used in weather modification. It's used to alter soils, make them acidic so that plants don't grow easily. It's basically warfare against us, weather warfare and energetic warfare against our planet and us.
So now you say it's warfare against us, but apparently our government is doing it to help us, right? So what is the reason what they would be spraying this upon their own population, considering that, again, I mean, I understand where at one level you want to control people, but at the next level, do you want to also kill your own families? And they're not necessarily going to be protected from this spraying either.
Right, that's the big question. Why would they spray their own families? One of the simple answers is that they're psychopaths and don't know the consequences of their actions. The other answer that started to make itself clear to me is that this is above the government and beyond the government, because we really can't get any answers from our government. We also are aware that many of these programs are being done by private contractors. There are over 50 private weather modification programs going on at any time in the United States. So it's not just government, it's private contractors, but you do have to ask the question, why would they do this knowing it's harming themselves and their families? And I found more and more evidence that this goes far beyond our government, and when you ask them to stop and you beg them to stop, you're gonna get answers like, we're not doing it, or you're just going to get, I've gotten complete nonsense back from my senators that had nothing to do with even what I asked them. So you're not going to get much from the government, and I don't actually believe that they can stop. I don't know that they are the ones ultimately behind it.
Right.
As we know, there's a power structure on this planet that goes to the banking families, and it does go beyond that as well. There's a long history.
So in your investigation, what does it lead you to conclude as far as who is behind the spraying?
Well, ultimately, I find that parasitic entities, off-worlders, are responsible. And I know that sounds a little outrageous. It took me years to come to this conclusion, and I had to go through many different channels. First, I had to learn what they were spraying and just understand the basics of how the weather is modified. But I didn't even fully understand it until I learned the other side of the story, which is what energy we can use to combat weather modification, which is orgone energy. It's the life energy discovered by Wilhelm Reich back in the 1930s. He discovered this amazing energy which we all have within us. And when I learned about this energy, then I saw there's two sides to this story. when I saw strange things in the sky that I couldn't explain, I'd see the chemtrails and I'd see funnel clouds. What are these funnel clouds? What are these strange puffy clouds that form at the end of a long chemtrail day? I started to see that there were people using this energy. I started to see evidence that Oregon Energy was working
to break them up.
break them up, exactly. And that's when I started to make my own. And then I saw massive changes in the atmosphere in Southern California. And that led me to further understanding that it was something beyond our government. And I studied Wilhelm Reich's work, and he also found that there was something beyond human doing this. And after he made this discovery and reported his findings to the Air Force, his life completely went downhill. I mean, he was already under fire from the FDA for finding this energy because he was using it to treat cancer.
Yeah, I mean, I've not researched Reich in depth, but what I recall were things pertaining to his development of orgone. But people oftentimes allege that was just sexual energy, and he was basically tapping into people's sexuality and whatnot. And so that's why a lot of counterculture people and hippies got interested in Reich. But tell me more about what actually, what actually orgone energy is and how where it's found, how it's activated.
Well, it is related to sexual energy. It's the life force energy. It's what makes us alive. And it's an energy that is now called scalar energy in physics. And it permeates everything. It goes through us. It moves faster than the speed of light. It's in the atmosphere. It's in plants and minerals. It's everywhere. This is the energy of life. This is what makes our earth beautiful and vibrant. It's what makes plants grow. It's what makes rain fall. And he discovered it almost by accident, but he discovered that his patients had an electrical pulse, a bioelectrical pulse in their bodies, which he was able to measure with a sensitive millivolt reader. And he was able to measure scientifically that we are energetic beings. He was one of the first people to be able to do this, and that we are not only energetic, but that this life energy is what can cure disease. And when it's healthy, when our energy is healthy, we don't succumb to cancer and other illnesses. When our life energy is stagnant and deprived, that's when we can have cancer and other illnesses. And his idea with the orgone accumulator was that he made a device that would accumulate the orgone out of the atmosphere. And he would have someone sit in the device for a period of time, 45 minutes at a time, and they would find a reduction in cancer symptoms. So it would reduce pain and symptoms. He was finding that actually when we are suppressing our own life energy and maybe not having regular sex and not having that expression.
Right, the flow. Basically, it's like about the flow of energy as opposed to the blockages.
Exactly, that it'll be in a contracted state. But when we're healthy and we're having sexual relations that are healthy and we're having friendships and loving relationships in life, that our orgone energy is in an expanded state, and that's what leads to happiness and well-being.
And so you say that ultimately this research led to some level of interaction or understanding of an alien presence or an alien agenda? So for many, many years, Reich struggled with the idea of emotional plague. Why are humans in the state they're in? Why is the world in the state it's in? He was seeing horrible war and atrocities just as we do today. Why would humans do this to each other? And he determined for the longest time that this is because of the suppression of our own energy, our armored nature. We're armoring ourselves. And when you're armored, you're going to express in anger and hatred. You're not going to be able to express love. So this armoring of the individual was creating so many problems in the earth. He called it emotional plague. Many people are starting to see a connection between these problems and an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional presence, which is actually feeding off of these negative feelings on Earth. And he made this connection visually when he was doing his cloud-busting operations in the deserts of Arizona. He traveled across the country with his crew in order to study the drought conditions, because Tucson, Arizona hadn't had rain in years. It was terrible drought conditions. And in his travels across the country, he saw a smoggy haze just everywhere. And we're talking in the middle of nowhere. This isn't just in cities. He'd see this smoggy haze. He was seeing what is the visual manifestation of electromagnetic pollution, what we call electrosmog now. And so it looks like air pollution, but it's actually the visual manifestation of deadly energy.
Nowadays, that energy comes from HARP and from cell towers and those things. But in his travels, he hadn't yet discovered where it was coming from, because this is long before.
This is pre-cell phones.
Yeah, this is the 50s, early 50s. When
Pre-Wi-Fi.
Exactly. He arrived in Arizona and he saw increased drought conditions and advanced desertification as he went across the country. And he discovered so much by setting up his cloudbuster and beginning the operations. What this device did was it drew the dangerous energy out of the atmosphere and infused the life energy into the atmosphere. So he would draw out the deadly energy, and as he did so, he saw this smoggy haze disappear, and the horizons become clear, the mountains in the distance look blue or purple, and the atmosphere cleaned. And soon after, clouds began to form, natural cumulus clouds began to form, and even before the rain started, green grass started to grow around him. And he was seeing that the desertification was caused by deadly energy. So this is not actually a natural condition on Earth. In the course of his work, he was staring at the sky all the time. He started to see stars at night that would flicker and fade and retreat in the face of his cloudbuster. And he reported these stars to the Air Force, because he thought they should know this. These look like crafts. They're moving, they're fading.
This is pre-satellites too. It wouldn't have been a satellite at that time. Right?
Yeah, this is the early to
30s,
mid 50s.
or
Early to
so
mid
50s.
50s, yeah,
Okay.
by the time he was doing the cloud busting. So the discovery was made in the 30s.
Yeah.
And in the 50s, he started doing these experiments to use the energy to do drought abatement, to bring back rain in droughted areas. So he was seeing that the device drew deadly energy out of the atmosphere, cleaned the air, and brought clouds. But in the process, he also saw at night that these stars that he thought were stars would retreat and fade. And he did this again and again and realized that the device was having an effect on these craft, and they were craft, in fact, and not stars.
Right.
He reported this to the Air Force, and they gave him a questionnaire. They already knew all about this. The questionnaire you can read this in his book, Contact with Space, his last book. The questionnaire detailed what did the craft do. It had like a list. Did it flicker? Did it move this way? And he was able to answer their questions, but the fact that they already had the questionnaire printed up and ready to go shows that they kind of knew something was going on up there.
Yeah. Well, there certainly have been plenty of reportings of unidentified flying objects, and that's just an old, how do you say, that's part and parcel when it comes to any kind of Air Force activity. Pilots, anyone who deals with the skies has seen plenty of these. So did he ever have any particular interaction, though, with any alien species? It
was all etheric. It was all on the psychic level. So he found that the heavy, bad energy, he called it deadly orgone radiation. So there's orgone energy, which is the life-giving energy of the universe. It's just to describe it briefly, it's a spiraling waveform, and it moves faster than the speed of light, and it's capable of restructuring and transmuting EMF, electromagnetic fields. So this energy can make the radiation from cell phones and wireless devices and cell towers far less harmful.
Right.
Which is why ultimately it combats the geoengineering, because it disables the energies they use, and it also throws the pollutants from the atmosphere. So his interaction was he noticed that the DOR, the deadly orgone radiation, was heavily present when these crafts were around. So he would notice a correlation between the crafts and the deadly energy, and he also noticed that when he drew the deadly energy out of the atmosphere, the crafts also retreated. They flickered and faded and retreated. So he renamed his cloudbuster the Space Gun and was using it to literally do battle with the ETs. But all the effects he felt, he didn't meet them in person. All the effects he felt were psychic.
Yes.
And it happened to his entire crew. And I can tell you from experience of distributing these and working with this energy, it's happened to me too, and it's happened to many other people I've talked to that do this work. These entities are extra-dimensional, they're multidimensional. They can affect us, and they do, but it's mostly on the mental level. So sometimes people say, are you worried for your life that you're going to get run off the road when you're going and hiding these everywhere and disabling cell towers? It's actually not so much on the physical level that we're attacked, it's much more on the etheric level. We're given horrible visions, we're made to feel, it happened to him too. You feel depressed and
depression.
Yeah, all these bad feelings. I can tell you many people nowadays feel those things out of nowhere a lot of the time, because indeed we're all under attack right now.
Well, certainly. I mean, I don't know, empirically, just having seen a lot of these massive cloud formations coming after, probably created by chemtrails in Los Angeles, for example, where you just get days on end where it's just cloudy and overcast, there's no rain, it's not building up to anything. It's just, you can tell, it's like very heavy layer that's formed and set there. And immediately, energetically, everything kind of becomes depressed. And it could be, could be from that, as you say, that negative force that's operating. So as far as your research is concerned, do you think, how do you say, did you find anything definitive, or was it more predicated in someone like Reich's work and the overall theory that if it's going above human level, that we're talking about an alien agenda that is basically working to acidify our bodies, to cloud our minds? Is that ultimately what you conclude about who's behind the chemtrails?
That's what I've concluded. I don't have proof. I don't think there's any proof of anything, in fact. I mean, the people who are talking about chemtrails on a very basic level, all of the organizations like Geoengineering Watch that talk about chemtrails, they never touch orgone energy. They're telling one side of the story. They're just talking about what they're doing to us and making us feel helpless, pretty much. There are people who talk about orgone energy. It's coming out much more now. Ken Rolla is a scientist that talks about this very brilliantly in physics terms. There are many people who work with this energy. George Ritchell, Organize Africa, has turned around the subcontinent of Africa by distributing 25,000 of these. So it's coming out more, but on a basic level, most of the organizations dealing with geoengineering won't touch this. And I believe that's part of the cover-up. I believe that that's part of the PSYOP, where we've discovered it, we see them, we see the chemtrails, they depress us. The energy is heavy, like you said, you feel it. It's not just the seeing it, you feel it. Because chemtrails don't exist in a vacuum. They're not just spraying metals up there. In order for them to even stick and do the work they need to do, they're bombarding them with electromagnetic fields. So they're creating these unhealthy skies. They're positively ionized, which prevents the hydrogen bond, it prevents rainfall.
Right, and negative ions are very cleansing. That's what you get from the ocean, for example, and certain mountains and whatnot.
Right, exactly. And mountains, that's good that you mentioned that. Mountains produce orgone energy naturally. And pyramids, in fact, are made to mimic mountains. The shape of the pyramid and the mountain will put out a wave of orgone energy from the peak. And that's why we make pyramids. Like, this is a little ziggurat pyramid. We make pointed pyramids too, but that's why we make pyramids. It's a great way to direct energy. And it's very cleansing, it's negatively ionizing. Orgone energy is negatively ionizing. So it's cleaning pollution from the sky, and it's also infusing negative ions, which is why we've seen so much increased rainfall in California. Again, I can't prove it, and that's the difficult thing, is even the American Meteorological Society, in a study on negative ionization that they had been running for 5 years, said it's not even enough time in 5 years to prove anything. So all we can do is just keep track of our results, which I do daily on my blog, and take pictures, keep the satellite imagery, and just write a written account of what we see. We've been doing it for 2 years on thechembo.tumblr.com. So we keep track.
So how do you actually create orgone, as far as this, for example, these are orgone devices, right? So what are the elements involved in creating it?
A crystal, usually quartz. Quartz has piezoelectric properties. So we use quartz crystals, and they go inside a resin, and the resin squeezes on the quartz and activates those piezoelectric properties. So the quartz contains the orgone energy or the scalar energy already. When it's put in the resin, that increases that energy by squeezing it. And that's how they work in our electronics too, the quartz crystals. And there's metal shavings inside. This one has the same stuff. It's just all kind of mushed up together. That's a tower buster, tactical. But it has metal shavings, a copper coil. This one has shungite and smoky quartz crystals. And we also use selenite. But all you really need for working orgonite is a quartz crystal, metal shavings, a copper coil, and a catalyzing polyester resin. And it works in that way that the crystal contains the energy, the squeezing of the resin activates it further, the metals broadcast that out. The finer, the better. You get much more of effect. And the copper coil is throwing negative ions out. So one little guy like this, it's just good for your bedroom to neutralize the Wi-Fi radiation and stuff like that. These ones are tower busters. We'll place these near cell towers, and it turns the energy. You'll see amazing atmospheric results. And I have loads of pictures of this, hundreds of pictures for 2 years of this phenomenon. You'll see the sky clean. You'll see the return of like deep blue skies, cumulus clouds. We'll see HAARP breaking down, the HAARP ripples completely breaking down, the chemtrails fall apart. It's a wonderful feeling. And I believe the real cover-up here is not the chemtrails, but the energy we have to fight the chemtrails, and as well, who's actually spraying.
So you're actually going around planting these little orgone bombs, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
around LA? Is that what's going on?
Oh yeah, we've put hundreds of them in LA. I would say probably, it's hard for me to estimate what we have in LA. It could be around 1,000 between what we've distributed and what we've given to people around here. We've tackled all the cell towers here in the Central Valley. We've gone all the way from El Centro, near the Mexican border, all the way up to Redding. We've distributed approximately 3,000 around the state in the last 2 years. And we're still working, always working on it. But,
So basically, could people, they could purchase these orgone items? Could they? They can build them themselves. They can, are there other means of creating orgone devices? Or
yes, there are many ways,
Yeah.
actually. My website, thechembo.com, has a video tutorial on how we make these simple pieces, so you can learn to make your own. You can also buy them from us. We sell them for very low prices, especially the tactical tower busters. We make them very affordable so that you can gift your community. You can take care of all the cell towers near you. And I can also explain, I mean, the website has a lot of information on how we do it, how it works. So yeah, anybody can do this. And if you don't want to work with resin and you want to try something different, there are other devices. There's a device called the Obelix, which is a wrapped quartz crystal. I have links to that on my site. That's somewhat easier for people to make who don't want to work with resin. You can make quartz medicine wheels in the Native American fashion. I have videos about that too. You can get everything from my website. So there are many ways that we can access it, but here's the interesting part. Since we contain orgone energy in ourselves, we technically don't need these to do the work. But the way these help is we live in such an energetically compromised world with deadly energies bombarding us constantly that our own energy field is compromised. So we use this as a supplement, an energy supplement, to help us access what we already have. I personally have seen the multidimensional aspects of geoengineering through working with this. I've seen stuff that cannot be explained very easily. I've seen the planes disappear. They shapeshift. I've seen them disappear. I've seen...
So this could be almost, the planes themselves could be some kind of UFO in their own right.
I've seen orbs spraying. I've seen loads of orbs. And I've seen them spraying. I see them disappear. And most of all, when I direct energy at them with my own intention, keeping in mind our hearts generate an electromagnetic field that extends around the body. So this is scientific. This is not New Age nonsense.
Right. Yeah.
Although a lot of people will say it is because it's unseen.
Right. Exactly.
I have seen the chemtrails break up when I direct energy at them. And I've also seen the planes completely disappear.
So again, going back to this agenda, though, do you think that there's nothing I mean, this is basically I don't even know where to start. the UFO agenda of why they be spraying.
Right.
It has to do with affecting our mindset. Does it have to do with actual depopulation, or is it just more of keeping us in a place of illness, mental fatigue, and depression, unable to tap into our own strength as, let's say as individuals, as people, we're much more powerful than the ruling elite, for example.
Right.
But perhaps, is this part more on the mind control side of things, or is it, do you think, an actual plan to kill us slowly without having to overtly do it through a concentration camp scenario? It's just like, okay, we're just going to spray them and basically make them unhealthy and sterilize them through perhaps sterilize them, for example, and do other means that are not as obvious.
It's both. It's both. And the chemtrails work on different ways on different people. So for the people who are completely asleep and don't even see the spraying, they're the ones that are getting killed, because they don't even see it. So they're absorbing the metals and they're living in polluted environments. They're absorbing heavy metals. They're probably being bombarded with EMF. They probably haven't figured out that they can remove the smart meter and not have Wi-Fi and turn off the cell phone when they sleep. So these people are the ones that are suffering the most, I think, and suffering in silence. Then there are the people who have discovered the chemtrails and see them. And for them, it's not just the pollution aspect and the the depopulation aspect, but it's the PSYOP, it's the psychological warfare. Because for people who have discovered chemtrails, a lot of them know about the heavy metals and they know that there's supplements they can take to remove them. They're a little more aware. So they're able to be living a somewhat healthier life, even in the face of this biowarfare.
Right.
So there's that level, but they're gonna be super depressed because they see it and they think there's nothing they can do except just keep taking these vitamins. Like I would take zeolites and different heavy metal chelating vitamins, like I would use chlorella and eat a lot of cilantro. Meanwhile, I'm being sprayed every day. Before I discovered this, I was still feeling depressed.
Right.
And then there's the level beyond, which is where we know that we have the capability of completely undoing it. But that's what they really are covering up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is definitely on a psychological level. So it's depopulation is happening, but on the psychological level, this makes us very depressed. When we have this, it completely turns around.
Right, right. Well, there's also this theory about how the heavy metals are basically going into us and making us perhaps easier as receptors almost, right? Because we become antennas
Yes.
at that point. So if they do want to affect our decisions, our minds and whatnot, it's easier to do so the more heavy metals are in our system, ultimately towards this idea of the cybernetics revolution or the transhuman agenda, the idea
Yes.
that they want to merge us with machinery.
Right, and it's all about the enslavement of humanity again. Because our evolution is not about transhumanism, and many people are misled to think that by merging with machines we'll become super people.
Right.
That's not the case. And what Reich found that links back again to the ET influence is that he found the desertification. Okay, the environment is a reflection of us. So that is something to remember, is that when you see chemtrails in the atmosphere and you see a polluted world, it's a reflection of something going on inside of us.
Yeah.
It's affecting us. We're not separate from the world. He found that the deserts were becoming more and more desertified over the years. So 13 years before, he had been through that area and it hadn't been as bad. It was getting worse and worse. And his conclusion was bombardment of deadly energy, DOR, for 25,000 years was causing these great deserts, and that it was a terraforming operation by off-worlders. The idea was to suck off the lifeblood of the planet, their parasites. And if you've heard about parasitic ETs that connect to our lower chakras, this is what's happening. As strange as it sounds, the planet is being desertified by these beings that want that kind of environment, and they also feed off of human misery. We're like cattle, we're food to them, and when we overcome these obstacles, and even if you look at it as a metaphor and don't really believe in the ETs, when we overcome these energetic obstacles, our lives just transform.
Right. So speaking of Reich again, he ended up in a mental hospital, I think, right? Didn't the government push him into a mental hospital?
They put him in prison.
In prison, was
They
it?
put him in prison. The FDA had an injunction against him. They determined that orgone energy didn't exist. That's what the FDA said. They said orgone energy doesn't exist.
Right.
So they burned all his books. They said that if you talk about orgone energy, you're in violation of the law. They burned his books. They destroyed his laboratory. They put him in jail. And ultimately, it was one of his colleagues transporting radioactive material across the country that was how they were able to put him in jail. I mean, there were a lot of things that he did. He was trying to work with the Air Force, in fact. He was trying to work with the government. He told them what he was doing.
Right.
He said, I have this device. It needed radioactive material because what we found is, he found this first, that deadly energies actually excite the orgone. So he was using deadly energy along with the cloudbuster because the orgone works harder in the face of DOR.
Right.
So he was exciting this orgone energy this way, and he was able to create rain as far as Los Angeles and Pasadena from Tucson. Of course, the Weather Bureau didn't report on it. And that's more of the story coming up. But anyway, that's the story of it.
And so how did he end up, though? I mean, he ended up his life in prison, or?
He died in prison in 1957, 2 weeks before he was supposed to be released.
Wow.
I believe, from what I've seen, that the FDA did not like that he was treating cancer with this energy, and they simply just said it didn't exist. They had no way to say it didn't exist, no proof that it didn't exist, whereas Reich actually had measurable proof that it did exist, or at least scientific evidence. He had measured the current in his patients. He had actually been able to see the bioluminescence, the blue light, in a controlled study. Orgone energy, the color is actually blue. So he was trying to determine this scientifically, and the FDA didn't like it. And I think ultimately he met his demise by getting too involved with the government over this, thinking as a foreigner coming to this country from Austria, he came here for freedom. He believed America was a free country. He thought it was going to be different than where he came from. He didn't understand that our government was corrupt, and he naively...
The totalitarian nature of our scientific and medical establishment.
Right, and he told the Air Force about the UFOs. They sent him the UFO questionnaire. He had told them way too much.
Right.
And then, okay, back to the story of the Weather Bureau. They didn't report on the rains that were created by the cloudbuster. So his colleague William Moyes wrote a letter to the Weather Bureau informing them of the activities and asking why they didn't report on it. All the Weather Bureau sent back was, to me, a very chilling response. We thank you for informing us of your activities.
Well, there you go. They got the information they needed. Do you recommend any book on Reich, or do you think that ultimately maybe that's in your future, writing a real history of him?
Yeah, I feel that some people find it hard to read his books, and they ask me where can I get good information on orgone energy, and I always say read Wilhelm Reich's books. Mm-hmm. God, Ether, and Devil, and Cosmic Superimposition. They come in one volume, those two books. That's a great book about orgone energy and what it is and how it works. It explains the spiraling waveform in this photograph being shown. You could see the spiraling energy, actually, of how it's literally just cleaning it. It's like a vacuum cleaner for geoengineering toxins. So what it does is
it's a very angelic formation, isn't it?
And people think they're angels. That's one of the things I get. People think that these are air spirits, and you know, really from a scientific point of view, this is a scalar wave vortex. This is an upside-down tornado being created by the spiraling energy of orgone. That's maybe hard for some people to understand, so they will see this as an angel. It does look like an angel, and it is a very beautiful energy.
Well, maybe that's the whole reason why angels are depicted in that way. There is something, how do you say, there's a scientific truth to it as far as their actual physical body would appear.
And that could be because what we also found through working with the orgone energy is that orgone is universal God consciousness. Wilhelm Reich discovered God. We have found our God, he said. And it is everywhere. God is everywhere. God is orgone. It's the cosmic orgone. It's our universal consciousness. I definitely recommend, if you want to know more about orgone energy, those two books, Cosmic Superimposition and God, Ether, and Devil. And Contact with Space is my very favorite of Wilhelm Reich's books, because this is where he really gets into the weather war. This is where he realizes that the bombardment of our planet with deadly energies, in fact, the geoengineering, the weather modification has been going on longer than we think. So the experts now will tell us it's been going on since the end of World War II. I've seen ample evidence that it's been going on since before that.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, the terraforming, the desertification, the drought inducement.
But this weather modification was going on from an ET level, not from any kind of government planes, for example, at that point.
That's what he found, that's what I'm finding, and if our government is involved, which I think they are using technology. The former Canadian Defense Minister, Richard Hellier, had a great interview on RT about
was it Paul? I think it's
Paul Hellier.
Sorry,
yeah. Paul Hellier. He had an interview where he described the different ETs, and he described the technology that was given to our government. So it's possible that our government is doing it. I'm not saying they're not. And I'm not saying there aren't private weather modification programs going on all the time with planes flying over and spraying chemicals. But there is definitely a higher aspect to the geoengineering, and it's a consciousness suppression in order to keep us in the enslaved state. It's an energetic war.
That's it. So basically on the Chembo, you basically you blog about it and update people on what's going on as far as your data on your work, right? As far as using orgone to combat the chemtrails. Yeah,
I do a day-by-day documentation, and the picture that's being shown right now is this is what happens to a chemtrail when there's orgone energy present. It doesn't spread out. It breaks up into little pieces, and I have lots of photos of the different sky phenomena. So day by day on the chembo.tumblr.com, we report what we're doing. We're in different places around California. We move around. We're in LA for a long time, and now we're living outside of LA. And
do you have any way of amplifying the energy? I mean, it seems if you just have orgone on the ground, it might be difficult to break it up in the sky. Or is it that powerful?
It is that powerful. It is that powerful. I've seen one pyramid, when you bring it into a new area, especially that has not had this energy, and when I say that, I mean the energy is everywhere and it's part of the earth, but it's been so compromised. by the terrible things going on with cell towers. And in the earth, we have fracking and all these things that are compromising the ley lines of the earth. So the natural electromagnetics of the earth's lines, the natural energy of the atmosphere is being compromised. I have seen literally one of these in a place that I hadn't brought any before, clear the sky completely all around within about a half hour. For the most part, we want to use more than one. I mean, it doesn't always do enough if it's just one.
Yeah.
The way to really amplify the effect is to put them near the cell phone towers. Again, like Wilhelm Reich discovered, the deadly energy actually excites the orgone. It makes it work harder. And so we flip towers. They no longer are positively ionizing and damaging the atmosphere like they were. They're now neutralized. So yeah, that's the most bang for your buck with the orgonite, is to put them near cell towers.
Now we can only convince some people in the Air Force and the military to start buying some of these and placing them around military facilities, on planes and whatnot.
Well, as far as I know, Don Croft has placed it, a lot of them. Don Croft is the guy that invented the idea of the gifting movement. The orgonite was invented by Carl Wells. Don Croft was the first person that came up with the idea of distributing them far and wide. And as far as I know, he gifted some Air Force bases. And that's something that can be done. It can be done by civilians. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be on the base, just near it, just around it, and it makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you're doing fantastic work, so really, we appreciate that.
Thank you.
People can follow it, obviously, on thechembo.com.
Yes.
Right, and on Tumblr as well.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it's fantastic that you are actually being proactive in this weather war, as we're calling it. And frankly, most people aren't even aware of it, but it's at least what we can do is start to become aware of the fact of the chemtrails, and hopefully start to build our own orgonite,
Right.
come to you, buy some, do something at least to protect ourselves and our immediate environment. And the more we can spread that information, the better off we'll be.
That's right. That's why I teach about it.
Until we can get to this ultimate question of who these ETs are and how we can have our final battle with them.
Well, you know, and ultimately it doesn't even matter if you believe it or not. It doesn't matter. The fact is, we know there's deadly energy, we know there's chemtrails, and we know this helps. So
Exactly.
I know the deeper story is interesting, but again, it's up to the individual to do the research and figure that out for themselves.
Exactly, because I think the war happens on obviously on many levels simultaneously. It happens through influence of government, it happens through these manufactured wars and all types of manipulations that are going on. But I think when it comes to weather, obviously that's something that hits very close to home. It's something very visible from our backyard.
Right.
So it's one thing we have to at least be proactive about. If we can't affect anything else in our lives, at least we can protect our immediate surroundings.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So thanks so much, Sharon, for joining me today.
Thank you. It was great.
I really appreciate the conversation.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Absolutely. And thank you again for your work.
Thank you.
Well, there you go, folks. Some great insights from Sharon Daphna, and obviously she's doing some wonderful work. You should check out more on thechembo.com. And yeah, obviously chemtrails are something that I think it's evident to the naked eye at this point. If you are still in denial about it, well, just, maybe you're a lost cause. But for those who have an open mind and are willing to look and see, and remember that we didn't always see this level of chemicals in the sky, and that definitely the actual pattern and the actual geometry of it has shifted over the years. We have to wonder why. And if you think orgone is just some kind of quack science, try it for yourself. See how it feels to you energetically if you acquire it and put it around you. This is Sean Stone signing off.